Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you for being here today. Today's webinar is based off of all the great work that the Bioassessment and workstream has been doing of the World Water Quality Alliance, with very many thanks to John, Fabio, and Sandra for being co-leads on this workstream. And so I look forward to the great work that they're going to present to you today. And I look forward to having some great engagement and great questions from the audience today. Please use the chat for introducing yourself, who you are, to the rest of the participants. And please use the question and answer to be able to ask your questions, and we will try. We do have a dedicated question and answer section that is going to be where we answer all of your questions during the webinar at the end. So I look forward to a very active engagement, and I'm going to now hand over to John, who's going to take you through the rest of the webinar.
Okay, thanks very much, Anham. Hi, everybody. Well, for those of you that do not know me, my name is John Sumaika. I'm a senior researcher in aquatic ecology at the International Water Management Institute in Sri Lanka, Colombo. I am co-chair of the Biodiversity and Biological Monitoring and Assessment workstream, which the work of which we are presenting today. This is also work that's being done in collaboration with GLOSAM, which is the Global Macroinvertebrate Sampling Protocols Task Force. The two organizations have been quite busy trying to both address the technical challenges to do with aquatic biomonitoring and also the policy aspects. So we've done quite a lot of exploratory work, much of which we want to demonstrate today. And of course, we also came up with some recommendations based very much on the responses that we received throughout the world from many participants, nearly 500 people that responded to our surveys. And so this is now an opportunity to actually give back and to let you know, what the findings are, what is really the status of bioassessment in the world. With that, I would like to introduce our speakers. We have two speakers. Both of them are members of GLOSAM. The first is, sorry. Before I do that, I actually play a short video about the BBMA. So I hope that this will work. Please let me know if you can hear it. Could everybody hear that?
No. No sound.
No, but you could see the video?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see it, but cannot hear it.
Can see it, but you cannot hear it. Video settings.
John, perhaps we could show the video maybe
towards the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's do that. So I'll stop sharing. With that, then I would like to introduce our speakers. First, Ms. Alejandra Correa-Bedoya. Alejandra is a junior lecturer at the University of Antioquia in Colombia. She has 10 years of experience in aquatic entomology, freshwater ecology, and bioassessment. Her work is mainly focused on Colombian streams and has focused on protocols and metrics for freshwater ecological assessment using freshwater invertebrates. Alejandra is also an active member of Macro Latinos. And then our colleague, James Stripling. James is an aquatic ecologist, formerly at Tetra Tech Inc. in Maryland, the United States. He has more than 30 years experience in developing aquatic monitoring and assessment data sets for use in environmental management, decision-making. Much of his work has been assisting with continuous implementation of the United States Clean Water Act, using indicators of biological and ecological integrity as objective statements of ecological health. Over to you, Alejandra.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you, John, for that short introduction. So, James, can you share your screen, please?
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
So I will start this off. Alejandra and I are doing a joint presentation here, and I will start it off giving you kind of a overview of the policy brief that we put together as Glossum and WA put together. Alejandra is going to get more into the kind of the technical details that are related to the survey results that we did. Okay, advance, there you go. So we've largely been focused on the sustainable development goals of the United Nations Environment Program, which is the clean water, is focused on the clean water and sanitation. This shows a number of different subcategories, and we are primarily focused on the water quality part of this. So clean water and sanitation, but the water quality is one aspect of that we're looking at here. And that in with under that as well, it's a layered, they're layered goals, and we're really focused on the proportion of water bodies with good ambient water quality. So that's kind of that's the focus of the WWQA work we did, and a lot of the work that Glossum is doing as well. A number of the issues that we're aware of, and I think a lot of people are aware of, is that globally, access to clean water is limited and is inconsistent. Some countries have a lot of, it's more consistent than others, and it's not as, all the different issues that come with, toxins or, any kind of, chemical water quality issues. But there's also a poor understanding about aquatic ecosystem health. That is, that communities they might have an assumption that all water bodies or all water is good. They just don't know the condition, the environmental condition, ecological condition of different water bodies. And we're, part of what we're doing is talking about the advantages we get when we use biological data, biological indicators as telling us what's going on with these systems. Major gaps that we have seen in the surveys and the results of the surveys is that policies do not exist largely at national levels. The protocols are often not available for field work, lab work, or any kind of data analysis, are just not available for many countries. One thing to be aware of too with all of this is that in many cases, even when protocols do exist, they aren't done correctly. So you have to have a lot of caution in how you use the data and interpret it more in some places than other. And we have found a fairly strong link of the national economies are related to how widespread and in use biological monitoring protocols are. Just to put this kind of in context, there's water resource integrity. The better condition a water body is in, the ecological condition of a water body, the better the conditions is closer to integrity, having integrity. There are 5 different classes of environmental variables that, when they're altered by human activities, it causes the integrity of the water resource to be what becomes degraded, so it loses its integrity. And this from water pollution, habitat, physical characteristics, biological interactions like invasive species, diseases for the aquatic organisms, and other biological interactions that way. That's not the good ones that we're talking about here. Energy source, whether it's different water bodies might get energy from external sources like leaves and riparian vegetation and other inputs, or they may be It may be where they're intrinsic, they have an energy sources within the stream, and how those are altered also affect the water. Altered hydrology is major, in particular with flowing waters, are a major factor influencing water resource integrity. It's very rare, and from my personal experience, I'd say it's almost non-existent that water resource integrity is degraded by single isolated stressors. It's always multiple and simultaneous stressors, so it's always a complex situation that we're dealing with. It's not a single issue going on. The reason, among the many reasons that we are interested in seeing biological assessment and monitoring data be more used in monitoring, is that they are much more robust. That is, the information content is just leaps and bounds above what you get from strictly water quality data. They help integrate, because they live in the system. They help integrate both short-term, long-term, spatial, and temporal scales of inputs of pollutants or degradation events, and that we feel like that they also offer a very solid foundation for environmental management decision making. This is in the reports that we have put together, and this webinar is based on. We support the working toward actions that help integrate water biological monitoring into water monitoring frameworks that strengthen capacity of countries and programs to do to build their capacity for doing water management, and better engaging stakeholders, people who have an interest and relevance to what's coming out of the monitoring program, or how the data are being used. We are working on harmonizing biomonitoring practices among globally among countries, both countries that have strong monitoring and then those that are trying to get monitoring going, using biological to inform transboundary policies and interactions among countries, promoting ecosystem-based management. And then we're also interested in increasing technological innovation in biological monitoring, kind of like genetics, environmental genetics monitoring. With that, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague Alejandro, and some of the various surveys that we've done. Alejandro?
Yeah, thank you, James. So here I will present an overview of both survey bioassessment protocols. First one, the key focus was on freshwater invertebrates. And the second one was a global bioassessment survey. So our aim, as James told you, was to assess how bioassessment methods are applied globally in managing freshwater ecosystems. The survey, which was focused on freshwater invertebrates, focused on national, subnational, and transboundary protocols used in both ecosystems, rivers, and lakes, helping to identify both officially and accepted protocols, which are recognized by governments, and the ones which we defined as unaccepted protocols. That means that they are in use, but they are not endorsed by governments. The first survey was managed into three main steps. Survey number one, that one gathered information on accepted protocols for both lakes and rivers. Survey number two explored non-accepted protocols, as well as other biological quality elements such as algae, plants, and fish. And survey number three helped fill data gaps in countries where protocols were recognized, but they were not digitally accessible, or there was no information on websites available. So despite extensive efforts, they were in this survey, which focused on freshwater invertebrates, where we identified there were significant gaps, data gaps in around 62 countries, particular countries across the Middle East, North and Sub-Saharan Africa, and Central Asia. This survey, overall, we think this survey works as a valuable foundation to understand the current global landscape of bioassessment using freshwater invertebrates. Now I'm going to talk about the Global Bioassessment Survey, which James will focus on key results at the end of this presentation. The objective of this survey was to understand how bioassessment is used in freshwater management worldwide, including all biological quality elements. The survey focused on the experiences and the perceptions of the practitioners, the strengths, the challenges of bioassessment, and the reasons behind its adoption, or in some cases, the lack thereof. To analyze trends, findings were linked to per capita GDP, gross domestic production, and the Human Development Index. Then we grouped countries into 4 economic classes, Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4, which I will elaborate more in the following slide. And survey was widely distributed via email, social media, conferences, and professional societies, and also was hosted on the WWQA website. We gathered a total of 342 responses from 109 countries, which is a huge effort. And James will elaborate more on these results later. James, please continue. Next slide. Sure. Okay. So here we are going to look closer some of the key results of the bioassessment survey, focusing on freshwater invertebrates. We gathered a total of 141 protocols across 79 countries. Here, I just want to highlight we gather or receive responses coming from 99 countries, and 22 countries reported not to have any biological monitoring taking place in the respective countries. For national protocols, we gathered a total of 103, 91 of them officially accepted, and the rest of them non-accepted. For national protocols, 27, and 2 transboundary protocols. Just to clarify here that we gathered information or we reported information on 2 transboundary protocols, but it doesn't mean there are 2 transboundary protocols worldwide. So in order to clarify the number of responses per survey, survey number 1 reported a total of 68 responses, survey number 2 a total of 42 responses, and survey number 3, which aims was to fill in gaps, we gathered a total of 11 responses. And also, I want to emphasize on this slide, the highest number of responses came from countries with Q4, which corresponds to those countries with high income GDP. The lowest number of responses came from QA and Q2 countries, which correspond to low and low middle income countries. Next slide, please. James, can you continue with next slide? Thank you.
Sure. You see that? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
It's slow.
Yeah. So methods were classified into a bioassessment framework, which had 5 main parts. Number 1 was field sampling. Number 2 was analysis of raw data. Number 3 was metrics and indicators. Number 4, reference conditions and ecological boundaries. And number 5, intercalibration methods. Here, I'm just going to give you a little bit about each of them. So for field sampling, we defined 4 different categories: site selection, sampling season and frequency, sampling area and duration, and sampling devices. So overall, we could say that site selection for sampling macroinvertebrates still rely on expert knowledge more than other methodologies such as stratified random sampling or definition of reference sites. Over a third of methods lacked a defined sampling season, And tropical regions follow this wet-dry season sampling, while temperate regions shared seasonal variation, with most of them predominantly in April, in spring and autumn. Across methods, most methods used annual sampling. This means that the sampling is taking place once during a year, with some occurring with a lower number of methods occurring seasonally or multiple times per year. Also, we identified there is like methods still rely more on sampling time, sampling duration. So the way how they standardize the sampling relies more on time than area. So it was not easy to standardize an area to average for all the methods, but we could say that 20% of methods did not define the sampling area or the sampling time. So now we are able to identify some gaps in standardization of methodologies for sampling. Talking about sampling devices, nets were the most common device across ecosystems for rivers and lakes, followed by graph samplers, which were more predominant in lakes. Artificial substrates were rare, as well as other devices such as picking and active search. Next slide, please, James. Sure. So the other core part of our analysis on focusing on freshwater invertebrates was the definition of indices. We tested the use of multimetric indices, single indices, and predictive models. The most predominant across methods was the use of multimetric indices, which imply the use of different metrics to compile or to be together a multimetric index. Overall, the most common metrics rely on composition metrics, taxa abundance, and radio abundance, which were common across both types of ecosystems, lakes and rivers. Then taxonomic diversity, and then sensibility, which was, even though it was common across both ecosystems, we can evidence they were more common or more used in lakes. The less used metrics rely on feeding ecology, trophic interactions, microhabitat, and life cycle metrics, which this pattern was common across ecosystems. As I told you before, we also focused on analyzing ecological boundaries, definition of reference conditions, and intercalibration between different methods and metrics across assessment protocols. For reference conditions, we identified that from the total of methods we included in our analysis, 75% of them have defined. However, we want to note that the most predominant methodology for defining reference conditions was expert opinion, rather than other methodologies such as list store size, use of historical data, of modeling methodologies. For ecological boundaries, 60% of the methods showed evidence of having defined these quality classes for water quality. And the most common methodology was EQR, equidance division ratio, more predominant than other methodologies. For intercalibration, I just want to mention that even though the number is 36% of the methods, this methodology was more predominant in European countries, which were part of or are part of this Water Framework Directive. So we considered this is our European-based methodology. However, we want to highlight the importance of calling the attention for having this methodology in other methods in other regions. Next slide, please. So here, I want to show you 5 keynotes that I considered as one of the main reflections given and resulted on this freshwater invertebrate survey. So bioassessment, we all know here, bioassessment using invertebrates is affordable. This is a widely indicator group. It replies simple equipment, but with evidence, it requires investment in trained personnel and trained and more knowledge on taxonomy, on definition of reference conditions, on definition of ecological boundaries. We evidence significant regional disparities with the underrepresentation of some regions, especially development regions. This also is linked to the need of clearer definitions of sampling season, sampling frequency, and sampling effort in bioassessment protocols. We need clear protocols now, and we need this because this is the way for the decision pathway for consistency and comparability at the end of the day for decision making. And I want to emphasize also in something that James mentioned in one of the slides he showed before, harmonizing monitoring approaches enables regional and transboundary reporting. That I think it's one of the key purposes that we are here in this webinar. Thank you. So James, yeah.
Thanks,
Okay.
Thanks, Alejandra. So yeah, I'm just going to get into a few of the few slides and things that we learned from the survey, an additional survey we did. We were looking at bigger picture bioassessment as part of national programs, national policies, and a few aspects like that. So you saw some of these numbers from Alejandra earlier. So you see that a lot of the responses that we got were, this question was simply asking, is bioassessment used in your country? And you could see that mentioned the different levels of GDP that Alejandra mentioned. From Q4, we had a 92% positive saying, yes, the bioassessment is used in our country, and you see the reduction there from left to right on the second bullet from 92% down to 48% down to Q1. So kind of gives you a picture. Again, these are questions. This is the number of responses that yes, bioassessment is used in our country. Another one, we did ask the respondents to rank what their perception was of strengths and weaknesses of their programs. And I'm not going to go through this in excruciating detail. There's actually a lot of information here, but anywhere from strengths being the data quality that they're getting out of it, that is acknowledging the uncertainties associated with it, differences, strengths and weaknesses among the GDPs, of being able to interpret what's going on, that is the stressors that are causing the problem or may not be causing the problem, that varies from strong to weak depending on the GDP, and how much what your capacity is for actually designing, implementing, and maintaining a monitoring program, the capacity, availability of facilities and people and training and all of that. So it's quite a lot of, like I said, quite a lot of information here. Another question, we asked why the bioassessment is not used in your country, and you see the list there on the that varies by different by the different GDPs as well. But weak governance, a lot of people would consider water chemical monitoring to be sufficient. So why do bioassessment? There's no national initiative or policy. There's no policy initiative to support it or to ask for it to be done. And then there's just not a lot of confidence in the biological data because it hasn't really been talked about or sold, or people have not been trained in it. So a lot of different potential issues that hold it back in different countries. We did leave come to 5 areas for action anywhere. And this is, you know, I mentioned policies, national policies. That's a big part of this. There's a big need to build the capacity for monitoring and assessment in a lot of different countries, and to being able to maintain that over time. When policies are existing, another need for that is to make sure that they are enforced. You might have a policy, but then it's not done, or it may be done but not done correctly. I mentioned that earlier. That's a big need here. And also, action would be to find a way to prioritize the conservation or restoration of the water resources. So 5 areas of action. We came to these through the surveys we did, the results that we just presented to you. So, and I believe I am turning it over to John here.
Yeah, thanks so much, James and Alejandra. This is really interesting and informative. So here are some big challenges. And with that, I would also like to call on and introduce our panelists. So we have 3 panelists joining us today. I would like to introduce Dr. Mark Graham. He's a director of Ground Truth, which is a South African consulting company with over 20 years experience in water, biodiversity, and engineering across aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems. Then I would like to introduce Dr. James Dalton, who is director of IUCN's Global Water Program in Switzerland. He has over 20 years experience working in over 25 countries worldwide and sits on the governance committee of the Hydropower Sustainability Assessment Protocol, the board of the Alliance of Water Stewardship, and is a technical advisor to the Climate Bonds Initiative. And Dr. Jennifer Lento, who is the current director of the Canadian Rivers Institute and a research scientist based in the Department of Biology at the University of New Brunswick in Fredericton. She's also co-chair of Freshwater Bund, which is the Freshwater Biodiversity Observation Network, and is, of course, a member of CLOSAM. Right. So maybe I could ask all 3 panelists to turn on their video. And yeah, no, James, indeed, keep the slide up. I think the first question was actually for James. Yeah, how do the results inform public policies? We look forward to your response on that. And the panelists, of course, may then respond to James as part of the discussion.
Yeah, thanks very much, John. Can you hear me okay? Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. I think what's really interesting with the results, and honestly, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, I thought it was a really good overview and presentation of the issues and the challenges in terms of almost a common dictionary of approaches, a common dictionary of terms, a common dictionary of capacities that are required within the different context of where the monitoring is done. And I think whilst you have guidelines and material that can be developed that is about delivering public policy for improved water resource management, it doesn't mean to say that it always translates down into the ground. And I think there's actually an interesting there's an interesting link to the work of corporates on this element as well, and how difficult water resource management is for companies when they're trying to implement a private policy, but within the broader remit of public policies, how difficult it can be to mobilize and deliver public policies on the ground. So I think the way that these results can be used to inform that is, one, is about building national to local level capacity in terms of what the policies mean and how can they be implemented better on the ground. I think obviously this information is crucial for, one, mobilizing different sources of information and data. So citizen science and other types of free, open, publicly generated community information and knowledge is critical in these processes. And so recognizing that as an important data source is also important for the role of public policies going forward. I think improving the way that this could be used to improve water quality standards and regulations. Obviously, there's some countries that already do take these types of things into account, but that could certainly be more present in many more countries. But for that, you need a broader assessment sort of type of program. I think obviously this is important for not only identifying what type of potential pollutants are in freshwater systems, but also the impact of those different pollutants and where they're potentially coming from. And this links back to the point that, one of the challenges with any of this is really regulation being up to date and present and current, regulation being practical in its application, and regulatory capacity to actually deliver and enforce it. And I say enforce in the sense that in many countries, there's also a process here of change. The transition to improving water quality is not necessarily something that's going to happen overnight because it comes with costs and challenges. It can get very political, as we're seeing in many sort of, environmental frameworks globally at the moment. So how then can this information be used to inform the transition that you want public policy to take to become stronger over a 5, 10, 15-year horizon? I think it also gives you a good idea of where you should really prioritize restoration and conservation efforts, so to speak. Where should more effort be put that can really help reduce pollution, improve freshwater biodiversity, improve riparian habitat, improve the river reach, and therefore from there improve the basin. So it's useful in that sense, and therefore using this information is really important to help tack that into broader river basin management policies. Some recent work as well was showing that if you just take broader the assumption that applying a good water resource management plan is also going to be good just for biodiversity, that's generally not the case, and you need very specific localized plans for freshwater biodiversity benefits. So I think this work is critical to inform the development of those more tailored plans under the framework of a broader basin plan. I think having people involved and just raising public awareness and improving stakeholder engagement and community engagement with this type of projects, collecting this type of data and information is crucial because it helps people recognize much more about the connection between, if you like, land management practices to the impacts on fresh water. So that's also an important element to raise that attention. And I think, using this more broadly, looking at lessons and examples from different countries where this has been used, US Clean Water Act, the EU Water Framework Directive, in Australia, I think the river assessment process that they have there as well. And I know that there's been work like this in South Africa as well. That can, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and how can that be used to inform public policy, I think is crucial. But just my last point is the challenge is finding those public policymakers who will be willing to come to the field to see what's happening and to sit at that table and understand the implications of this work. And I think that's crucial. And I think that's where it's important to understand the value of this work and what it can help inform in terms of making policies work better and informing policy development going forward. So I'll just stop there because I've probably said too many points as it stands.
No, I think that was really great. And it's quite a lot of points actually. But let's hear from the panel.
Yeah, John, Mark here from South Africa. Greetings, nice to see you again. Yeah, the results in terms of public policy, I think there are a number of things going on there. And I think the one shortcoming, if anything, I think we're missing slightly in this discussion is what are our options in a kind of those Q3, Q4 countries that you're putting up? And what strikes me there is that the analytical capacity and the ability to get to some of those classical wet chemistry options that we all know about, that's increasingly challenging in a resource challenged situation. So I think we need to pivot on that, if anything, and use the results and the findings, which are great from this work, and try and emphasize this as an alternative to some degree and an option, which I get some of the study results coming through indicating, it's more expensive, typically biomonitoring, but I'm not convinced about that argument completely in a resource scarce environment like Q3, Q4 that you mentioned. So I think that for me is some of this debate that we need to take forward and use that in the policy briefing and discussions with public and authorities in certainly some of the parts of the world, in Africa, for example. So that for me was a bit of a standout. I think this concept of the volunteer monitoring, that that horse has been around for a long time, and I think again we want some sort of differentiation of, and I think it's an important piece in terms of how we look at this work. But volunteering, monitoring, and citizen science, how do we bring that into this picture as well? And linked to that really is obviously, for my mind, it would be, what is the amplification and the linkages and the correlations between some of the citizen science work that's coming through, and how does that correlate with some of this really high-end biomonitoring and information we get out of that? And then the last piece I'd like to sort of home in on under this point in terms of public policy was this. We talk quite strongly in this piece about enforcement. And I think the other dimension to that, which isn't really coming through, but it's this whole concept of using this biomonitoring, not only in the enforcement aspect, but it's how do we bring social license to operate? And the understanding that really is so evident in biomonitoring, typically with the common policymaker or somebody who's not particularly informed, but it's a very quick win to bring the understanding of sustainable water resource management, pollution sources and impacts into this discussion. And that really would be a very helpful, and we need to, I think, foreground some of that a bit more because of its utility in actually engaging and starting some of those conversations and moving from enforcement to social license to operate. Thanks, John.
Thanks very much, Mark. Well, since we have you already speaking, maybe you then would like to speak on the question we had assigned to you, which was, well, what do you see then the role of each sector, academic, governmental, business, or community in advancing bioassessment? I think you touched a little bit on that already, but feel free to elaborate.
Yeah. Thanks for that, John. Probably misreading my cues there and responding to James a bit. No, that's great. Look, I think there's a huge space here, and we've in fact just completed a whole Water Research Commission project on a lot of this and using citizen science particularly to advance exactly this topic. And we literally had the reference group last week, but I think I saw Bonani Matikizela on the list of attendees, but there's a huge role here, both from the academic side, how do we get the training going? And there's been some research happening in that space. What are the opportunities to actually encourage more of this into the curriculum? From the governmental side, it's integration into water resource poor environments where, from an enforcement point of view and so on, it's increasingly relevant in a resource-constrained environment. So I've spoken to that to some degree. I've mentioned the social license to operate component, but then linked to that clearly the community being able to reflect back into business. How it is that some of these activities and things that are going on in these areas could in fact be usefully integrating into encouraging better water resource management because of the ability to illustrate some of the impacts of some of those, whatever the industry is or the community or the business might be, be it mining or forestry or manufacturing. Back to you, John.
Thanks. Any responses from the panel? Jen, James? What are your thoughts?
To the practical steps, John.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some quite good questions in the coming from the audience actually at the moment as well, in terms of getting a sort of common framework for applying the approach, getting a common understanding of the data that can be collected over time, so that actually you can start to build a bit of a picture of any potential trends. I think very practically also understanding that hydrology is changing and shifting, more so than it has since people were really monitoring this due to climate change. And so as a consequence, practically this is also about understanding the changes that are going to be taking place in our systems more broadly, and the impact that can also have on biodiversity and the implications on water quality. So I think there are some practical steps and things to take forward. People are asking questions, as always, is how do you get local communities, how do you get people involved in the process? And I do think there's a volunteering processes is great. I honestly think combining this possibly with other tools such as one sort of bioassessment, bringing in citizen science and voluntary interventions and bringing people on board in communities, linking that also with eDNA assessments, and just building a much bigger picture over actually what's the health of the river, what are the implications of that on water quality, and where are those problems coming from. The thing that I've always found interesting in talking to companies in river basins, in particular the bigger ones, is that normally when the bigger ones are paying attention to either impacts on their needs for water or the implications of their operations on water quality, it does tend to mobilize a lot of other actors around that conversation. Because if the biggest player in the basin is paying attention, then why are the others not paying attention as well? So I think using those practical opportunities to create these types of discussions, round tables at that level, and specifically around water quality, are really, really important for public policy development, mobilizing the tools, improving practices, and just building broader data sets, but data with a purpose, in the sense that it's linked to responding to challenges and responding to questions that people have. I think that's really important. Over.
Thanks. I do have maybe some questions, particularly about how we can ensure longevity when programs actually do exist, because sometimes governments also decide to can some of the biomonitoring programs. What would be your thoughts on that, James?
Yeah, I mean, I think, that's a very good point. The easiest, I think with any of these things, the key thing with any form of development such as this is to first and foremost always think about sustainability. And it's a really difficult topic because often the people doing the work are not necessarily the people who will generate the resources to get the work done. They're also not the people who develop business models around this. So I think understanding is how can you institutionalize these types of practices first and foremost needs to be the start of any sort of baby steps in developing these types of programs, really. And I think then working with the public sector to understand what skills are needed, where can these fit. And I know that's very difficult, very, very difficult to get these things taken on board. It's very, very difficult to understand how these things can be embedded financially into ongoing, sort of treasury discussions and line item things which are already overcommitted. So I total sympathy there. But at the same time, at least one, recognizing that sustainability and maintaining these programs is important, seeing where you can embed it into ongoing programs, looking at developing different types of funding mechanisms and pooled funds. So we have a similar challenge, and it came up in the presentation. The first sort of couple of minutes from James mentioned the role of this within transboundary waters as well, is, getting transboundary agreements working is very, very challenging. Getting them to be maintained is harder still. Getting to an agreement is one thing, but making that roll out into an actual joint management plan between states, very, very complicated. So building sustainability and looking at how different resources can be pulled together to pool new programs is really important. And I think if countries want to set up action plans, they want things to put in place, then building in financial sustainability and asking those questions. How will this continue? Where will it be paid from? And diversifying sources is important. We try and diversify sources from private finance, from public finance, and also from multilateral finance, and tapping into that and using some of these approaches to embed them in ongoing other projects and activities that will continue through different mechanisms, like different projects starting and stopping, but maintaining a level of funding that will support this type of activities over time is key. And I think always demonstrating the value of it. If it's not valued, then people don't tend to want to keep funding it. So always demonstrating what is the value of this, what does it improve in terms of impact, and therefore how can it be sustainably financed is critical. And I know that's challenging because, often people are filling data gaps without necessarily knowing the value of that information. So I think there's some hard questions to ask at the beginning of these types of programs, but they're good questions to ask because these are the sort of things that increasingly funding is going to be linked much more tighter to impact and use of the information. I think that's only a good thing. Thanks.
Mark, you had your hand up.
Yeah, John, just responding to James, he's absolutely right. And our sense of it is it's so much more accessible. And I think this is what the magic of the biomonitoring is really, and why we need to work more closely with this. But the magic being, if you take anybody down to a river and you show them some of those macroinvertebrates, the visceral response from just a kind of interest science biology is so much more tangible than producing a pH or a conductivity result or a calcium result, wet chemistry, classical. It's so much more accessible. And I think we as a community working in the space really want to be amplifying that message and utilizing all the opportunities to engage further on that because of this visceral accessibility to this kind of work. And I think that's where the whole community around citizen science, which is a feed into this, is also such an important element that we need to make and take cognizance of as well.
Okay, I'm a little bit, thanks very much. I'm a little bit conscious of time, so I would like to ask Jen to answer this question. What practical next steps can be taken to implement improvements?
Yeah, I think a lot of this is really ideas that have been brought up thus far. I think when we think of this idea of how do we have sustainability, how do we ensure this works, a lot of this comes back to this idea of ensuring there's policy in place and ensuring that there is enforcement of policy. So thinking back to some of the ideas that came out in the surveys where biomonitoring was not happening because there's no policy there, there's no mandate for it. It really can have an effect on ensuring that some actual monitoring is happening, ensuring data are being collected, and then we can start to answer some of our questions. And I always think of the example of, in Europe, there is the Water Framework Directive. And because there is the Water Framework Directive, because there is enforcement of it, there is so much data collected in all of the countries. There's great spatial coverage, there's great time series. And then I think about where I am in Canada as a contrast to that. And we don't have that kind of policy that requires that regular bioassessment is happening. Bioassessment is very reactive. There's an issue, there's a mine going in, well, we'll monitor in that area, but there's no actual proactive monitoring that's happening that's allowing us to have faster detection of impacts and allowing us to have these programs in place. And that's because the policies aren't there. So we talk a lot in Canada about this idea of, can we get policies in place that are enforced that then force the monitoring to happen so that it can be worked into the program. And when you have these sorts of, you have legal or financial incentives to get this done, it helps to make sure that it's more of a priority so that, there can be that conversation about making sure that more capacity is there, making sure that funds are in place for this. So that's one aspect I think of it is ensuring that that bioassessment is recognized in policy and that there is enforcement of that. But of course, the capacity is always a huge thing, and I think that both James and Mark have touched on this, the idea that there is a real importance of us getting communities involved, getting citizen science, getting community-based monitoring, Indigenous-led monitoring. These are all different examples of ways that we can build capacity by empowering people to play a role in this. And, I think we were just talking about this idea that if you are sharing with communities why this is important, you're taking them to a river to show them the organisms, get them excited about it. If you are doing that communication, educating people, that empowers them to want to take part in this. You can build these community-based monitoring networks. You can build the importance of citizen science. If you have standardized protocols that people can use, then you're strengthening the data, making the data are going to be more informative, more usable, and all of this is going to help to build capacity. And I work a lot in the Arctic, and this is something we talk about a lot for Arctic monitoring. You have these remote areas. It's difficult. It's expensive to get up there. You also have people living there who, for them, they care about this. So if we can work with the people who are living in these areas, we can talk to them about why this is important and help them understand how monitoring things like macroinvertebrates, which is fairly easy to do, how that can tell them about things like perhaps fish that they might care about, and how that can affect the fish populations. You can get that interest in it. You can have interest in communities and actually going out and monitoring this. And we've seen this in numerous occasions. And fantastic data can be collected that can help us to then detect trends, to assess what water quality looks like. So I think it's that combination of ensuring that the policies are in place, we're enforcing them so that there is that requirement that's recognized by government that we need to do this, but also empowering communities, which is going to increase that capacity, but also they will further push for governments to do it because they will have that interest. They'll understand why it's important for us to be doing this.
Yeah, I agree. There's also someone wrote in the chat, actually. I'm just bringing that in so that we can transition into the Q&A period a little bit. Sustainability surely needs to include businesses rather than just governments or grants. Off-takers of clean water, which is everyone, but particularly some businesses that completely rely on freshwater ecosystem health need to begin paying for that. Yeah, so indeed, this the polluter pays concept, I think, would be really important. But again, of course, governments need to push businesses then to comply, and there needs to be that legal compliance. Okay, we're a bit pressed for time. Thank you very much to the panelists. I would like to then hand over to Anham, who will moderate the Q&A session.
Hi, everyone.
John, I assume you want me to stop sharing now, right?
Yeah, yes, please.
Yeah, hi everyone. So just very quickly in the Q&A section, maybe we can start off with a question. Maybe Fabio, I've seen you've already responded to this, but perhaps you could just provide some insights. Where the question is, how can Indigenous knowledge and local communities contribute to bioassessment methodologies? So we've heard quite a bit of engaging the communities. So how can Indigenous knowledge support the various methodologies that are there?
I can just say for this, because this is something we work on quite a lot with Arctic research, what we're moving towards is this idea that we really need to be co-producing these methodologies. The methodologies need to include both, what we think of this, the type of what's often called Western science, but the, very sort of structured, going out, collecting samples, doing analysis, that sort of thing. But we also need to recognize Indigenous methodologies are equally important. Indigenous knowledge is equally important. It is a different way of knowing. And we can actually strengthen our bioassessment if we are looking at how we can weave together these two forms of knowledge, how we can recognize the complementarity of these different forms of knowledge. And again, it is about that idea of empowering Indigenous communities. So there's a lot of work that's happening in terms of two-way knowledge exchange, where you have, people with different, you've people coming with Indigenous methodologies, you have people coming in with the very structured scientific methodologies, speaking with each other, learning from each other, sharing those methods and figuring out how they can work together to bring those methods together and give us a broader sense of water quality.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jen. Okay, so there are a few comment. So there are a few other questions as well. So there is Abdullahi asking, what statistical methods are commonly used to analyze bioassessment data, and how can they help in interpreting the ecological status of water bodies? And part of this is, I'm going to also just add in how does it get used to predict long-term trends in water quality? Now, I would have normally passed this question to Alejandra, but she's had to leave due to us running a bit over time. So John, maybe I can hand this over to you, and then you can pass it over as well.
Actually, I think Sam would be best equipped to answer that, perhaps. James?
So yeah, I was just thinking with all this discussion, one of the things I agree with, everybody saying, on point, the right things. What is, I don't think we necessarily talk enough about is how the design of the field and analysis design, sampling design affects how the data can be used. So the more specific questions that are focused on with with the design, like if you want to know the condition of one spot, that's not necessarily gonna, one location, that's not necessarily gonna be able to be used for different, for different kinds of questions. And I've always contended that if you have like a statistical design, a stratified probability type rotating basin design in a watershed, that does lend the data and the data set to being used for a lot of different purposes, unanticipated. There's obviously what it's designed for, because there's a randomized component to it. You could use it for other things, whether it's biodiversity, condition, different spatial scales, and all that. Now, I think I might be skirting the question a little bit there, but the statistical methods, you have to know how you're going to be using the data when you're doing the design, and then you design it so that it fits how you want to interpret it or communicate it. It's not, to me, it's a lot of it's not rocket science. It's not real complicated statistics. So, I mean, we compare box plots with different, box plot distributions from different site classes or different assessments. We look at trends using box plots as well over time. So I don't know. I mean, I know Jen is a lot more in depth in all the different statistical approaches, but that's kind of the way I look at this.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, and I was
thanks
just
so much.
it doesn't have to be complicated. You can do some fairly simple measures that can allow you to look. It really is about, if you think about bioassessment, comes down to the idea of what are the things that are there? Are they things that are good with good water quality? Are they good with bad water quality? Are they different from place to place? Are they changing over time? It really, if you break it down to that basic idea of what is the composition, what does it look like? What do those organisms prefer? And are we seeing spatial or temporal trends? You can have very simple ways of looking at it that can work at community level. It can work at a very in-depth scientific level, but at all different levels can be quite accessible.
And one more thing to throw out there, it does depend on who your intended audience is. If it's a group of school kids, you're going to want to show them the actual organisms that were collected. They'll be dead, but whatever, you can show them that. And if it's policymakers or somebody, like if it's going to a business or whatever that wants to know the impact of their actions on that water body, they're going to want to see numbers and data. So it just depends on what the ultimate use is. But again, I just go back to what I said, that I do think that it is. I've always been a big champion of having a statistical based design, so you could use it in a lot of different ways, not a single way.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. I know cognizant of time, so I apologize for everyone. I think we'll just take maybe one last question, which is from an MSc student in Zambia asking, is there a blueprint or a defined way in which bioassessment has been made a policy in a country where the science itself was not appreciated? And so I see a hand up. Mark, would you like to take that question?
Not sure if it's a policy piece yet, but we've worked hard. It's been 10 years at least, but it's the integration into some of the policy frameworks at the national level on the National Water Resource Strategy documentation, where it's now formally recognized as a piece, particularly the citizen science component and recognition of 632 and 6B, and trying to get that articulation. It's been helpful pivoting on what's coming through from the SDGs, but certainly in a suite of work sitting in the South African context anyway, has been a formally, not quite a blueprint, but it's more of a advocacy space that many of us have worked on to try and get it instilled there. But it does take work.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks. Definitely. I mean, we have seen some of the results from, Q1 to Q4, and it does speak quite a bit. And I think, coming together, I think one of the hardest things is bringing together these various sectors to actually come and have some harmonized methods, that can each support each other, as well as, how do we get this data into country reported data as well, and then push it to policy. So I think it's been super great. And with that, I think I'll hand over to John and we'll close the Q&A. Apologies to everybody who we didn't manage to get to your questions, but we'll try and get to them via email maybe, or hopefully in another webinar at some point.
Okay, thanks, Anham. Well, I don't have that much to say other than I would firstly like to thank the speakers, James and Alejandra, and also the panel members, Mark and Jennifer, and James Dalton. James, your video is still off, for joining us and for presenting your thoughts, which was really valuable to hear. There's quite a lot of work that needs to be done. First of all, of course, in the Q3, Q4 countries, the ones that are doing bioassessment, we need to ensure that they continue with their programs, and that they continually improve those programs, so that also information is collected with the objectives in mind. And we, of course, want to get Q1, Q2 countries to start monitoring as much as possible, even if it starts actually with citizen science and then develops into larger established programs. Whatever approach works, it will definitely have to be tailored to the local condition. I think that's also one of the big outcomes from our reports. Great. Well, thank you very much also to everybody that joined today and listened. It was great to see at some point we had 60 or so people join us. I hope also that many of those people were actually people that responded to the surveys that we sent out. And again, a big thank you to everybody who responded to those surveys. And I hope that the reports will be useful to you. There's also a GLOSAM community. We're a community of practice. So if you haven't joined yet, please email us. You can look the email up in the reports at the end of each page of the reports. There's an email. Yeah. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. I'm just gonna have, as people are going off, I'm just gonna share the video, and then I will end the webinar there.
Great. Thanks, Anham.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Access to clean water is one of our most basic needs, yet millions lack it. Sustainable Development Goal 6 aims to secure clean water and sanitation for everyone. But achieving this requires urgent, effective monitoring of water quality and ecosystem health. Human activities and climate change are driving a global water quality crisis. To protect our rivers, lakes, and wetlands, policymakers must integrate biological monitoring into national and transnational frameworks, filling gaps in our current monitoring systems and providing a complete view of ecosystem health. Biological monitoring uses organisms like fish, plants, and insects to reveal changes in water quality over time. Biomonitoring gives us deeper insights into how pollution, habitat loss, and nutrient pollution affect river and lake ecosystems. Through harmonized, coordinated efforts, biomonitoring data can inform policies, guide sustainable water use, and shape investments for restoration. Global initiatives like the Freshwater Challenge are helping to drive these efforts. But it's time for countries to strengthen capacity building and stakeholder engagement to bring these solutions to scale. One global initiative leading the way is the Biodiversity and Biological Monitoring and Assessment Workstream, a part of the World Water Quality Alliance. Its goal? To establish efficient, comparable monitoring practices across countries for inland water biodiversity and ecosystems. This initiative fosters the collection and sharing of essential data, supporting a unified global approach to biodiversity monitoring and water quality. Immediate action is needed to harmonize monitoring practices, leverage new technologies, and promote ecosystem-based management. With effective biomonitoring, we can support sustainable development practices for present and future generations.